ahead and take your seats. I think there are those getting coffee still, but up is Miss Baumhardt. Give it up for Miss Baumhardt.
Hey, all right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming. I know there's some folks still grabbing coffee, which is important, so I will not hamper anybody from doing that. But my name is Kara Baumhardt. I am also a social worker. I've been working with this group for the past couple years, which has been crazy, because I remember when we were just getting started, it's been awesome. Just seeing the things we've been able to do, getting to be in Alaska for about 48 hours and all sorts of things like that. So I'm just really excited to be sharing this with you all today. This is a topic that is near and dear to me. As a bereavement coordinator, it was a concept that I actually used a lot more than I thought I would. And so I'm really excited to be digging into the topic of self-compassion with you. So the agenda we're going to be looking at, the topics we'll be covering, is what is self-compassion. Self-compassion is a term that's been coined probably within the last, I would say, 20, 25 years. So it's newer in the realm of psychological catchphrases. And so we'll also be talking about what it's not. And I think this will give us a really good idea of a framework of what we're looking at when it comes to actually being compassionate towards ourselves. And then there's 3 components of self-compassion we'll be digging into a little bit more. And those will be the next 3 topics that we cover. So what is self-compassion? What does this term mean? We have an idea of what compassion is. All of us have practiced it in some way or another. But what does it mean in terms of self-compassion? So I want you to imagine a scenario where your friend calls you to tell you that they had a really rough day. They're on the phone and they said, I was walking into work, I tripped on a curb, and I just spilled coffee all over myself. I paid $7 for it at Starbucks. I said extra hot. My white shirt is ruined. I had a meeting at 4. My day was a disaster. And they are just exasperated. They're on the verge of tears. You can tell they're just in distress and they just need somebody to listen to you. So what do we do in that scenario? How do we respond? Do we say, oh my gosh, that's awful. I'm so sorry. That sounds like you had a really difficult day. Is there anything I can do? Do you want to talk more about it? I'm proud of you for still pushing through. Or do we say, you should have been watching out for that curb. What were you thinking? Why did you order your coffee extra hot? Who does that? Do we berate them, or do we validate and support them in their distress? So these are how we respond to a friend. Hopefully, the answer in your head is the first one. If it's not, we can talk a little bit more about our interpersonal relationships later. But typically, we respond to our friends with kindness, understanding, and support. So the basic premise of self-compassion, if I had to boil this entire beautiful little Canva presentation down to one sentence, is that we are turning this support towards ourselves. So this term was coined by Dr. Kristen Neff, who's a psychologist, and she stated that it is, instead of mercilessly judging and criticizing yourself for various inadequacies or shortcomings, self-compassion means you are kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings. After all, whoever said you were supposed to be perfect? So self-compassion not only moves towards ideas or things that we can't control, but mistakes we make as well. And I think that's really important. So we're not just practicing self-compassion when somebody cuts us off on the highway, or a party we plan gets rained out, things that we can't control. It's also mistakes we make as well. Having a typo in an email that goes out to all your admins, sending the wrong text in the wrong group chat, being 20 minutes late to pick up a friend from the airport, mistakes that we make. So self-compassion goes towards those two, and I think that's really important for us to think about. So what I want to dig into before we even dig into the components of self-compassion is what it's not. And there's 3 things that it really is not. And that is self-pity, self-esteem, and self-indulgence. So digging into self-pity, really the main factor around self-pity is an idea of isolation. So self-pity involves forfeiting our interconnectedness with others in order to focus on just our own problems. We believe we are the only ones who are suffering, which causes us to feel separated from others in our suffering. Self-compassion allows us to recognize the broader human context of our experiences in order to reduce isolation and shame. When my former job was working in a psychiatric hospital, and I would have a lot of folks come to me and say that nobody understands me. Nobody understands what I'm going through. I feel so alone. And I don't want to call that self-pity because we have a very negative coin of that word. But we are kind of taught to believe that our problems are our own in a culture that is very focused on individualism and kind of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We believe that we have to shoulder our problems on our own selves. And so this creates this idea of self-pity of it's not just that these problems are hard for me, it's that I'm completely alone in them. So when it comes to self-compassion, really something to remember is that isolation equals shame, but interconnectedness equals compassion. The next one is self-indulgence. So self-compassion is not a permission slip for destructive or self-destructive behaviors. But on the flip side, shaming ourselves into change is also completely ineffective. And a personal example of that is I recently got back into working out. I work in a senior living facility, and I've come to realize that mobility and maintaining musculature and things like that is actually really important. So I've gotten back into getting into that. And a little thought that keeps popping up in my head all the time is when I worked out back in college, I could do so much more than I could do right now. And I would shame myself into believing you have to get back to that place because it is absolutely ridiculous that you can't do what you used to be able to do back then. So I would use that as a moniker to shame myself into going to the gym. I would feel like not going, and for me, the easiest, most convenient, most effective way to get me off my butt and into the gym was, well, it's super embarrassing that you're this out of shape at this point, instead of the original reason, which was I want to improve my mobility and take care of my body. So on either way, that is a form of self-indulgence. I'm indulging in that shame instead of extending any sort of compassion towards myself of, well, it's been a tough 2 years, you've been adjusting to the workforce, you've been through some difficult jobs, and it's just a good thing that you're getting back into it. So compassion for oneself involves accepting where we are, so meeting ourselves where we're at. So yes, I am more out of shape than I was in college, but that's just the fact of the matter. There is no emotional or moral pinning on that fact. And then we are inspiring change for a positive growth and outcome. So that is the opposite of self-indulgence. That is the self-compassion aspect of that. The final one is self-esteem. And self-esteem is a term that we hear a lot that I think has been very misconstrued in our thinking. Self-esteem is actually based on external factors. So it's basically making a laundry list of our achievements, the things that set us apart from other people, the physical achievements that we have created that make us feel good. It's that kind of hustle culture, that grind culture that makes us feel that we're productive and actually doing something with our lives. It's what makes us feel guilty whenever we decide to take a rest day. So we may evaluate ourselves and others based on these achievements as well as how we stand out. Self-compassion is not based in self-evaluation. It is based in the idea of self-worth, which is completely different, and that's the idea that all human beings deserve compassion, and they have an inherent worth in each and every one of us in here, myself, anybody out there as well. There is a baseline of worth that every human being has, and it is not based on any sort of external circumstances. You don't have to feel better than others in order to feel good about yourself. So that is what self-compassion is not. So we're going to pivot over into kind of dissecting a little bit more of what self-compassion is and how we can practice it in our day-to-day life, because it's more of it's a muscle that we have to practice. My muscle right now, my just unconscious immediate impulse is shame. That's my motivator. Compassion, she's on the back burner. So I have to work on learning how to flex that muscle and actually get it active again. So these three components are self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So we'll dig a little bit more into what these are. So self-kindness versus self-judgment. Self-kindness means accepting that we will inevitably fall short and make mistakes. That is a guarantee of the human experience, is making mistakes. Even in the Buddhist practice, one of the main guarantees of life is suffering. And in the same way, I believe that making mistakes and falling short is also a guarantee of the human experience. So we exhibit resistance to this acceptance by being self-critical, frustrated, and stressed. It's our way really of exerting control over this human experience, or feeling like we have some sort of stake in whether or not we make a mistake, or even a sort of penance that we try to practice when it comes to our inevitable failings as human beings. And every single person, even the people that we respect the most in our lives, have made some sort of mistake in some way. So a way that we practice self-kindness and how we soften self-criticism is kind of in a three-step process that the more you do it, the more fluid it becomes. Is that first, you want to notice when you're being self-critical. So if we're going to float back to that workout example I had earlier, I'm on the treadmill, I'm getting worn out at about a mile, whereas when I was in college, I used to be able to do 2 and be pretty okay. And so I'm saying to myself, I can't believe you're getting worn out like this. This is ridiculous. You should have been getting back on the horse a long time ago. What I do is I notice that, and I notice, ooh, that's a really intense thought. That was a lot. Wow, okay. And so then I soften the voice with self-compassion of, okay, well, I'm still here. I'm still doing what I need to be doing. And it's just been a rough couple of years, and I just didn't have the time. At the time, college was a little bit easier. And then we reframe those observations in a friendly, positive way of, I'm just here to build some more endurance. I'm here so that I can take care of my body, and that's all that matters right now in the face of these goals and expectations that I've had for myself in the past. So that's how we soften that self-critical voice that we have. And again, the more we do it, the more fluid it becomes. It doesn't have to be just kind of halting 3 steps. It's just more of a, let's notice this and kind of try to at least turn the lens a little bit to the left, rather than focusing so hard on what we find to criticize about ourselves. So the next one is common humanity versus isolation. Again, I discussed the idea of isolation equaling shame. And so in self-compassion, common humanity is the idea that suffering and inadequacy is part of the shared human experience. There are 8 billion human beings on this earth, and every single one of them is experiencing suffering and inadequacy in some way. It does not minimize your experience. So even if everybody experiences suffering and shame or inadequacy, that does not minimize the experience you're having as an individual. I say the same thing when I was working with grief clients of grief is a universal experience, but the way you experience it, the way you express it is individual to you. But it does allow us to feel less alone in our shortcomings and suffering. We make a mistake while driving, we make a mistake while working. We can come to grips and realize this is part of the human experience, and yes, I want to fix this mistake, but I am not the only person in the world who has ever done this. And that takes a lot of the pressure off of our shoulders to continue to perform. So taking a self-compassion break looks like, kind of in a sense, a little bit of a mindfulness break, where you are in the midst of a lot of emotions, a lot of inner turmoil. Some of it's directed towards yourself, some of it's directed towards the circumstances around you, some of it is directed towards the systems that you find yourself living in on a daily basis, and it's a lot to try to parse through. So in a sense, this is kind of like stepping into the eye of the storm a little bit. So you step into that eye and you say that this is a moment of suffering. You call a spade, essentially. This is not fun. I do not like experiencing this emotion. I would get rid of it if I could. There are things I'm doing that's trying to get rid of it, but it's not working, so I just need to call it for what it is right now. Then we have to recognize that suffering is a part of life. This is just something that happens to every single person. This is something I'm experiencing as a human being. I am not a better or worse person for experiencing this. It is just something that happens as part of the human experience. And then in that, and I think what is going to help drive that decision making going forward while you're in that eye of the storm, is setting the intention of, may I be kind to myself as I navigate this suffering. And that will help you take those first steps of navigating that inner turmoil that is directed at all these different directions that you're having, at least going in with the framework of, well, I need to be at least kind to myself through this. And that is taking a self-compassion break. The last component is mindfulness versus over-identification. Mindfulness has been a major buzzword that I've been hearing a lot over the past few years. And a lot of people think, oh, do I have to start meditating? Do I have to do the whole cross-legged thing on the ground? I can't do that. My legs have like ridiculous circulation, so they fall asleep. I can't. So my mindfulness looks a little different, but a lot of folks think, do I have to build this whole like yoga, meditation practice? Not exactly. Mindfulness really is taking a bit of an objective step back and looking at our situation, looking at our thought process, looking at ourselves without any sort of judgment. It's almost like if you took a robot and put it in your situation and had it write down all its observations, that's what you're looking at, rather than all the emotions and all of your moral frameworks and all of your values kind of tying into it. You're taking an objective step back and looking at it. So mindfulness focuses on observing negative emotions with openness and clarity. So this means that our feelings are neither repressed nor are they exaggerated. Mindfulness is a non-judgmental, receptive state of mind. So we're practicing this openness, whereas over-identification means that our feelings become who we are in that moment. We are what we feel. And one of the greatest phrases that I heard actually just on social media that I carry with me is somebody once said that you are bigger than your strongest emotion. And that has been such a helpful way of looking at my feelings and looking at my thoughts, because they can really put a vice grip on you. And as Kathy was talking about earlier, there's parts of our brain that are engineered in a way to do that, to keep us safe. But we have to find ways to be able to take a step back and look at our emotions and our thoughts and what we're thinking about ourselves and the world without over-identifying with them and causing them to become who we believe we are in that moment. So the last little exercise is what's called hand on heart. This is also a self-compassion exercise. And when you notice you're under stress, you take 2 to 3 deep, satisfying breaths. So this is not just like a hyperventilation. This is typically maybe a deep in through the nose for 4 or 5 seconds, out through the mouth for another 5 seconds. You are actively activating what is called the parasympathetic nervous system, or the part of your brain that signals, ooh, we're calming down right now. That is actually what's getting activated. So then gently place your hand over your heart, feeling the gentle pressure and warmth of your hand. What we're doing in this moment is we're focusing on sensations. We're focusing on the sensory experience of the world around you, which is pulling you out of your head and back into the present moment. So if you wish, you can place both hands on your chest, noticing the difference between 1 and 2 hands. So we're really trying to dig into that sensory experience. Feel the touch of your hands on your chest. If you wish, you could make small circles with your hand on your chest. Feel the natural rising and falling of your chest as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And then linger with the feeling for as long as you like. So what we're doing here is this is what's called a grounding exercise. There's a few different kinds of these. They're actually used very typically in trauma counseling because there's a dissociative pattern associated with trauma. And so the goal of mindfulness really at its base bones is bringing us back into the present moment. And this is an exercise to do that. So some other ways to practice self-compassion is, again, going back to that story that we have. Almost forming a narrative with yourself or a monologue in your brain of, if I was in my situation right now, let's pretend that my imaginary friend John is going through exactly what I'm going through right now. And John comes to me and spills all the tea about everything I'm going through. How do I respond? How do I treat John in that scenario? And then we compare that to how we've been treating ourselves so far. We're usually going to notice a pretty stark difference. And so it's important to start adapting into how we would be treating imaginary John in that situation. So before responding to our own struggles, think about how you would treat a friend if they were going through the same thing. Building a mindfulness routine. So that can be meditation, that can be deep breathing, that can be awareness practices. One of my favorite ways to do it, it is the summer of what we call hot girl walks. And so something I actually used to do in the wintertime at my last apartment, I was going through a really, really difficult mental situation, is every single morning before I would go to work, and it would be snowing when this would be happening, but I just really needed to do this, is I would put on my tennis shoes and I would go for a walk, 10-minute walk, and every single time I would go for a walk, I would say to myself, we're gonna find and count every single red thing that we see on said walk. And just for 10 blessed minutes of my morning, I was so hyper-focused on finding the red things that I wasn't drowning in what I was dealing with in my present situation. I was just thinking about what's red, and also, oh, look, that bush is cool. Oh, there's a cardinal, or oh, that person has these decorations out, or oh, this person has rocking chairs on their porch. I didn't realize that. Or these people have matching mailboxes or whatever, or the snow is really crunchy under my feet. I was just so drawn into the sensory experience of the present moment. That's mindfulness. That is not having to see a guru or do practice an hour a day or whatever. That's mindfulness, is those present moment, even if they are just a millisecond of bringing ourselves back into the present. And then figuring out what motivates you. Really building a system of values is so important. We have the values that we've been given as children by our families, by our communities, by our religious institutions, but these change as we age. We go through multiple value transitions in our lives. What is important to us is going to change. And the more in touch we are with our values, the harder it is for those negative criticisms to have an actual foothold in our lives, because we have something that's more important. So if we are actively working towards our values, or have an active understanding of what is really valuable in my life, is family a priority to me? Is my health a priority to me? Is my career a priority to me? Or even concepts like, is integrity a priority to me? Is humility a priority to me? Is socialization or connection a priority to me? These are values that we can latch onto, that we can focus on more than the negatives that we tend to focus on for ourselves. So this is a great way to build self-compassion as well, because we can also feel proud of ourselves for acting on our values and working towards our values, even if we fall short along the way. So some resources that I have, I've got a lot of books up here, and at the end I will have my email posted. So if you would like me to send you this PowerPoint, shoot me an email. But I wanted to include the actual kind of source works for self-compassion, because nobody does it better than the actual doctor behind it, Dr. Kristen Neff. So I've got several workbooks. There's workbooks for teens. Radical acceptance is also a really great concept to go with self-compassion. Radical acceptance is not us saying everything in my life is fine, okay, I just am cool with it, that's what's going on. It's the idea of meeting everything exactly where it's at for what it is, and then moving from there. There's also radical compassion. Brene Brown, who is also a social worker, wrote The Gifts of Imperfection. We've got self-compassion in psychotherapy, so if you're integrating it into a psychological practice. And then the mindful path is self-compassion. So having a mindfulness practice of going along with self-compassion. There's also self-compassion for dummies, which is a little bit of an oxymoron. There's other workbooks, Fierce Self-Compassion, which is specifically for women. The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. Self-compassion for parents, which Lord knows you need that when raising kids. How to Be Nice to Yourself, which is kind of the baseline of it. And then I've also got a few little podcasts and websites. Dr. Kristen F. has a website for self-compassion called selfcompassion.org that you can look into, that has her writings and more details on different practices. I chose a few. Those exercises I put in there were actually from her website, and she's got like a whole list of them. So if you're looking for more, highly recommend checking out her website. And that is it. Thank you so much. And here's my email if you need it. I'd be happy to send it to you. Thank you so much.